Hello and welcome back to the Max Runout YouTube channel. My name is Paul. Today we're going to talk about part two of our series on the off-road vehicle, and I'm going to say a few words about how I went about designing the thing, and then from there we'll get started on putting it back together. Um, I started by I knew I wanted something similar to a John Deere Gator in size and shape, and so I started out by just taking some basic measurements on the machine, length and wheelbase and width, and how the load box on the back was positioned, and some human factors like position of the wheel and the seat relative to everything else. So hopefully we get a comfortable ride. And then I ended up making a lot of drawings, and I'm going to show you just a few of the drawings here and give you an idea of how I went about it, but not intended to be a detailed set of drawings for the project. This is the basic frame of the machine. Actually, I did this drawing after I did an assembly drawing, but it guided me in laying out and setting up the frame. As far as the frame was concerned, one of the things I was worried about is getting it flat and straight. That's not an easy thing to do in a piece this shape. You can see this is the bottom portion of it. And the solution that I found is I had a brand new bench top. You can see it there, and I did some measurements on that and found that it was not only flat, but it was really square. And so I used that. You don't see the clamps anymore, but I used that with some spacers and clamps to clamp all the components of the frame to it, and then tacked them together and finally welded it. Here's the guy that knows all about welding. This is my friend Eddie. My procedure was to get everything all clamped together and tacked up, and then call 911. And Eddie was kind enough to come out and do the welding for me. This is the assembly drawing, the plan view, and that reddish pinkish blob in the center is the engine. At its proper location on the frame, and the thing behind that is the green thing is the transmission. You can see the front suspension there, and the two red lines actually were added later when I was trying to figure out how to do the steering geometry. Here's the elevation view of the assembly. Again, the engine in pink and the transmission in green. And in front of that you can see in the foreground of the transmission, you can see the countershaft and the pulley arrangement where the engine drives the countershaft. The reason, well, these drawings were made primarily for me, and in some cases when I started putting things together, it didn't work out the way I thought it would, and so changes were made, and in some cases I went back and changed the drawings and made sure everything would fit and so on. In other cases I didn't. This one's a good example. That countershaft is back when I was still planning to make a manual clutch for the thing, and that got changed a long time ago, and but it's still the same in the drawing. But on the front of the thing, I was starting to put together the outlines of the hood and the fenders, which were added much later. So the drawings aren't always up to date. In fact, often are not up to date. Here's a detail of the front suspension. You can see the axle and the wheel hub there, and the tire, and the A-arm below. And in red there, you can see this is something that I added later. I was working out the details of the steering geometry and how that would fit on the existing parts. And finally, I made drawings of all the parts that went into making the thing up. This is just an example here. These are the steering shafts that fit into the U-joints for the steering system, and they were fairly complicated parts. There's a spline on each end of the shaft, and on the upper one there's a taper and also a spline and then a threaded section, and I had to make these on the lathe, and so I needed some detailed drawings to get that right. We've got the whole frame suspended on a wooden cart or table that I built. It's got casters on the bottom, and it was built to fit the size of the frame. And that's been really handy. Working close to the ground is very tiring for me, and having it up high like this, where I can reach everything, has just been great. When I put the transmission in earlier, I had done it kind of on a temporary basis to work on a problem that we're going to talk about in an upcoming video segment. But what I had done was, well, it was only bolted in temporarily, and I had failed to slip in brake discs. So that's what I'm doing now. I've got a chain hoist to pick it up with, and I've got it hooked on the transmission right now. The transmission really isn't that heavy, but it sure makes it easier when you're working by yourself to move things around and get things located when you're with the chain hoist. So I got the transmission picked up a little bit, and I was able to slip the brake discs on through these windows in the back, and so we're gonna get those in place and bolt it back down, and then we'll be back. One note about the mounting of the transmission: this steel channel that I used has a bevel on it. You can see that here. It's thicker at the root than it is at the end of the flange, and what happens when you try to put something through here and put a nut on the bottom, it's uneven and could put quite a bit of torque on the bolt. And so to solve that problem, I took a scrap of let's see, you can see it here. I took a scrap of the material that was left over, and I cut a bit off the flange, and now when I do mounting, let's see, I lost it. There it is. When I do mounting, I put that piece of flange under there, and now I've got a horizontal surface for the nut to go on the bolt. I'm just showing you a place here where you can see the end of the channel, and but that's what I'll be doing in the back there when I tie the transmission down. I'm using nylock nuts to mount everything here, and stainless steel hardware, because this saw is going to be riding close to the ground, and I don't want to have rusting problems. Now this is a spot where the transmission bracket, this is the bracket holding the transmission, and that is bolted down through here into the frame, and this is the spot where I'll use the shims I was talking about. So that goes underneath there, and a washer. I'm blocking the view here, and a nylock nut underneath there. Well, it doesn't want to go on for me right now, but anyway, I'll get this bolted together and on both sides, and I've got the front already in, and then I'll be back. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is install the outer bearing supports. This is a piece of Schedule 80 pipe, and before this was all welded together, I had this in the lathe and I turned it to fit the bearings so they'll drop in there and stop. And I also machined a groove in here to fit these spring clips. So what we got to do now is install the bearings and fit the spring clips, and then we'll bolt them to the side of the chassis. These bearing supports are held on with 5/8 inch bolts, which are about 16 millimeters, I guess, in the metric system. And we're just tightening up the last one here. And and the final piece of the puzzle here is this guy. This is started out life as a solid round stock, and I bored the end to fit the diameter of the output shaft of the transmission. And this end was a piece I cut from some flat stock. It's quarter, or no, it's 5/16, and I don't know, maybe 3/8. I can't remember now. But anyway, Eddie welded this on for me, and I turned it on the lathe, and then bored the holes for the studs for the wheels. So that goes in here. I failed to mask this area when I was painting the parts, and I ended up having to put it back in the lathe and turn and sand off about 90% of the paint that was on there. But anyway, that goes in there, gets pinned in by two grade 8 bolts, and that holds the and then of course the wheel mounts here. We're all buttoned up on the back end now. The hubs are ready for insertion of the studs and mounting of the wheels, and we're pinned to the see the bolts in there that pin the axle extension to the axle, and the other sides are done now too, and we're ready to take a look at the front suspension. Okay, now we're going to take a look at the front suspension. These are the A-arms, and they're fabricated from steel tubing. That's about 1 by 2 inch or 2.5 steel tubing, and they have these pieces of round tubing welded on the end here where they will fit into the frame. You'll see in a minute. And a piece of flat stock on the end, which is drilled to accommodate the spindles and the rest of the steering mechanism. These spindles drop through. There's actually a spacer that goes in between here, this spacer, and that gets bolted onto there. A couple of 3/8 bolts, and you can see this is drilled in 3 places. That's to accommodate adjustable caster. I'll talk about that in a little bit later when we talk more about the steering, but I didn't really know what value of caster was appropriate for an off-road vehicle, and so this way I can adjust it where I want, and I've been running it at 5 degrees, and that seems to work pretty well. Let's see, these pins, spindles drop through here, and this is the steering arm, and let's see, now that goes on this side. No, wait a minute, the axle comes out here, so yeah, goes this way, and the axle slips in here. It's been a while since I took this apart. My memory is good, but it's short. But anyway, so it steers this way. This is this piece gets a pair of oilite bearings pressed in on the top and bottom, and then that fits inside here. I'll put one side together and get it mounted on the vehicle, and then you'll see better how that works. I did have the foresight to make some plugs for these before they got painted, so hopefully things will fit better than they did in the back there. So okay, we'll get one side together and then take a closer look. By the way, these parts are all steel that I made in my shop, and they didn't have any rust proofing either, and so I had them all nickel plated, and that worked out pretty good. It adds a couple thousandths to the surface diameter of the part, so I had to do a little bit of reaming and so on to get things to fit back together, but that ought to give me good rust protection. There's quite a few parts that had to get made. This is bucket full of parts that I made, and there's some more, and so you'll see them all go together sooner or later as we get this thing assembled. Okay, we've got the driver's side A-arm mounted now, and there's 2 5/8 pins that go through here, oilite bearings on each side through this tube that's welded to the A-arm. Same thing over here. The shock has a couple of brass bushings that I made to bring the pressure together on the bushing that's in the shock, and the kingpin and steering mechanism is mounted here. Obviously, this is the axle where the wheel goes. Again, there's a couple of oilite bearings, one on each end of this unit, and the axle is held in by a set screw that goes down into a hole in the axle, and then there's another set screw behind it that locks that in. And of course the steering arm goes here. You'll see that in a later video. Look at this a little closer. That's the steering arm assembly. Or I mean the kingpin assembly. And oh, I was talking about caster. I have adjustable caster. Actually, I can set it. There's 3 holes in this back plate, and I could tilt this forward or back to set the caster. The first one would be caster of 0, then 5 degrees, and then 10 degrees. And caster is just like it puts the center of the wheel, the axle of the wheel, behind the pivot point, and that allows your front wheels to act kind of like the wheels on a casters on a shopping cart. They'll as the back wheels push the unit forward, the front wheels are hanging. The center of the front wheels are hanging a little bit behind the pivot point, and so that causes the steering to self-correct. I have it set at 5 degrees, and I've run it up and down the road and let go of the steering wheel. It seems to work fine, so I think that that's where we're going to leave it. Now the front suspension is put together. Both sides are finished, and we're going to call this a video at this point. We got a lot of work to do yet on this guy, but the next video that's coming up, we're going to focus on a problem that we had when we were running this the first season, and how we go about fixing it. So thanks for watching, and see you soon in the next video.